case. Tonight we are traveling back to California. Shout out to all my friends in California. Tonight I'm going to be covering the case of Drake Bell, and this case took place in the early 2000s. Now, many of you may be aware that a new documentary was released on March 17th and 18th of this year called Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV. It is a 4-part docuseries which discusses the many shocking abuses of children, actors and actresses who worked on Nickelodeon shows. Now, there were a lot of things in this docuseries that I could discuss, but I am going to be focusing on what happened with Drake Bell. But I do recommend this series if you are interested to learn more, because there is a lot more to it than what I am just discussing tonight. So now, if you have never heard of Drake Bell, he is best known for his starring role on the Nickelodeon show Drake and Josh, which aired from 2004 to 2007. So let's start out with some background information on Drake Bell. He was born on June 27th, 1986 in Newport Beach, California, to his parents Robin Dodson and Joe Bell. His parents divorced when he was 5 years old. He attended Orange County School of the Arts and regularly went to punk rock concerts, which influenced his own music career. He would ultimately receive a GED. Drake began his acting career at age 5. His father was extremely involved and acted as his manager. He got some commercials and guest spots in various shows and movies such as Home Improvement, Seinfeld, and Jerry Maguire. At age 12, he auditioned for The Amanda Show on Nickelodeon, and Amanda Bynes, who was the Amanda from The Amanda Show, really liked him and he wound up getting the role. And this was the job of his dreams. In the second season of the show, it was the year 2000, and a man named Brian Peck joined as the dialogue coach. Now, he is not related to Josh Peck. As many of you know, Josh Peck was the co-star on Drake and Josh. Okay, so Brian Peck, no relation to Josh Peck. So anyway, Brian Peck was the new dialogue coach on The Amanda Show for Nickelodeon, and he got along great with Drake. They bonded on a lot of topics that they liked to talk about, such as the history of Hollywood, and Brian gave dialogue lessons in his own home. And Drake loved going there because Brian's house was loaded with exciting memorabilia from Hollywood. It was just a really fun house, and kids and Brian, I hope you enjoy the painting. Best wishes, your friend, John Wayne Gacy. It was painted by the notorious serial killer, John Wayne Gacy, who had killed 33 boys and young men and hidden their bodies in his basement. Do you remember that story? I didn't cover it, but many of us know it. So Brian had been pen pals with John Wayne Gacy, and John Wayne Gacy had painted this for him. And so all the parents and kids came in to look at this painting, and they were all in awe, but nobody seemed to be like shook by it. No one stopped and said, hey, why were you pen pals with a serial killer? And Brian kept acting, very proud of the painting, and he even showed all of them a huge stack of letters that he had from John Wayne Gacy that he kept in his nightstand. So anyway, that just gives you some background. Let's get back to Drake Bell. Okay. So, Drake's dad, Joe Bell, noticed that Brian was extremely touchy with his son. Like, he always had his hands on him. And his father was not happy with this. He felt something weird was happening. So he went to speak with the production staff. And the woman that he spoke with told Joe that Brian is gay and maybe Joe is just homophobic. And that's why he doesn't really understand the way that Brian is interacting. Doesn't really make any sense if you ask me, but that's what she said. Now the thing is, on these shows, you can't make a lot of waves, or at least, the parents and the kids realized if they became, a problem, if they complained too much, the kid could lose their role, which would be a terrible thing. And Drake was doing really well, so his father really, had to watch what he said. But he made it a point to really keep his eye on Brian and make sure that nothing, make sure that they didn't have alone time. Now Drake was doing so well that Nickelodeon was thinking about making a spin-off show for him and a co-star, Josh Peck. Brian suggested at this time that it would be a good idea that he takes over as Drake's manager instead of Drake's dad, Joe. But Joe refused that. Brian started to become extremely involved in Drake's life. In addition to being in a hit show, Drake also had a rock band that traveled around and, played in various places. And Brian would make it his business to attend most of these concerts. He would even travel to go to them. In 2001, phone and get him to admit it so they can secretly record him. So he did that, and luckily it worked. So in August of 2003, Brian Peck was arrested and charged with 11 counts, which included the following. Now I'm going to spell some of these things because they are pretty bad, okay? A lewd act upon a child, SODOMY, of a person under 16. Attempted, SODOMY, of a person under 16. Sexual, PENETRATION, by a foreign object. 4 counts of oral, COPULATION, of a person under 16. Oral, COPULATION, by anesthesia or controlled substance. Sending harmful matter, and using a minor for S acts. Really terrible. Now, Drake was unnamed, so no one knew that it was him. You know, the kids that were working for Nick were all told that Brian had been charged with SA, but they were not told who it was. Nobody knew. And Drake chose to tell the writer, Dan Schneider, who many of you know has also been accused of many terrible things, but we are not going to go into that today. But he told Dan Schneider, and he said Dan Schneider was actually very supportive. And understandably, Drake was emotionally a wreck from all of this. And luckily for him, during the fall of 2003, he was very, very involved with the filming of the new show, Drake and Josh, which kept his mind off of things for a little while. But ultimately, he wound up turning to drugs, alcohol, and self-loathing. He was not coping very well with what had happened. In October of 2004, Brian Peck pleaded no contest and was sentenced to only 16 months in jail. And he had to register on the offender registry. Now, Drake remembers when he went to the sentencing, he said the courtroom was split in half. There was his side, which had just him and his parents, and it was empty other than that. The other side was loaded with supporters from the industry, supporters of Brian Peck. Now, it has recently been made public information that the following celebrities, amongst probably others, had written letters of support for Brian at the time of his trial, asking for leniency, asking for only probation, saying that he must have done this out of extreme temptation, and it was very out of character for him. They had said things like, he's already suffered enough. And some of these people were James Marsden, Taryn Gilliam, Alan Thicke, Ryder Strong, Will Friedel, Tom DeSanto, Ron Melendez, and Joanna Kearns. Now, Joanna Kearns has since said that she regrets having written the letter of support. Now, Peck was released from prison in 2005. A year later, he was hired by Disney to work on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Now, in that show, he only did voiceover work for 3 episodes, supposedly, according to Variety. So he had no interaction with the cast or crew on set. And according to Disney, they dropped him once they learned about the charges. How did they not know? he was released the same day. And he was sentenced to 4 years probation and 96 hours in jail after he accepted a plea deal. In 2018, after dating for 5 years, he married Janet von Schmeling, and they had a son. They separated in September of 2022, and Janet filed for divorce on April 20th of 2023, citing irreconcilable differences. In 2020, Drake Bell's ex-girlfriend Melissa Lingafelt, who goes by the name of Jimmy Ono, accused him of physical and verbal abuse during their relationship in the 2000s. Now, the allegations that she made were on TikTok. She did not report him to police. It wasn't, a legal matter. It was just something that she said on TikTok. She said that when they started dating, she was only 16, and that the verbal abuse began when she was around 17. She said, quote, "And when I say verbal abuse, imagine the worst type of verbal abuse you can ever imagine, and that was what I got," end quote. She said that his abuse then turned physical and involved hitting and throwing. She said, quote, "At the pinnacle of it, he drug me down the stairs of our house in Los Feliz. My face hit every step on the way down," end quote. Now, Drake Bell denied these claims, and at the time, he said, quote, "I never abused my ex-girlfriend or did so many of the other things Melissa falsely claimed on her TikTok video. As our relationship ended more than a decade ago, we unfortunately both called each other terrible names, as often happens when couples are breaking up, but that is it. Clearly, Melissa still felt close enough to me just last year that she was comfortable reaching out to ask me to provide her with financial support during a tough time, which I did. I do not know if today's behavior is some kind of misguided quest for more money or attention, but I cannot and will not allow these offensive and defamatory allegations to go unchallenged, and I am reviewing my legal options," end quote. So I don't think anything else came of that. Now, on June 4th, 2021, Drake Bell was arrested in Cleveland, Ohio on charges related to, quote, "attempted endangering of children and disseminating matter harmful to juveniles," end quote. According to the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, quote, "The 15-year-old victim, who had established a relationship with Bell several years prior, attended his concert in December 2017. While there, Bell violated his duty of care, and in doing so created a risk of harm to the victim," end quote. The Cleveland police stated that Bell had sent the minor, quote, "inappropriate social media messages for months leading up to the concert," end quote. Now, Drake was 31 at the time of the alleged incident, and the girl was 15. He pled not guilty, and he was freed on $2,500 personal bond and was ordered to provide a DNA sample and stay away from the alleged victim. On June 23rd, 2021, he pleaded guilty to the charges. So he changed the plea, because originally he pled not guilty, so now he was pleading guilty. On July 12th of that same year, 2021, his accuser, who was then 19, alleged that Bell sent her graphic photos and was, quote, grooming her since she was 12. During the trial, she the same since I was 15. I think about these crimes every single day. I feel like I'm in a constant dark place. Sometimes I wish I could disappear so I can forget about what happened," end quote. Drake Bell was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. He is also not allowed to have contact with his victim. At the sentencing hearing, he said, quote, "Today I accept this plea because my conduct was wrong. I'm sorry that the victim was harmed in any way. That was obviously not my intention. I have taken this matter very, very seriously, and again, I just want to apologize to her and anyone else who may have been affected by my actions," end quote. He later stated in a video to his fans that he stopped texting her when her age came to light, like he did not know how old she was originally. But once he found out, he stopped texting her, and that no images of a sexual matter were exchanged. He also clarified that he accepted a plea deal, stating, quote, "I felt this was the best way to get this over quickly and for everyone involved to be able to move on," end quote. And that is the case. What are your thoughts? I will share some of mine. First of all, I am astounded by all of the terrible things that had gone on behind the scenes at Nickelodeon. But I am glad that it is all out in the open now, and hopefully changes will be made and it will be safer for kids now. Working on kids' television shows and things like this should become extremely rare. We see some things here in this case that we have seen time and time again. We see a very charming and manipulative perpetrator who was able to groom not only the child, but also his mother. Brian Peck was somehow able to turn Drake and his mother against the father, Joe Bell, because Joe was the only one who seemed to see Brian for what he really was, and he was in the way of Brian accomplishing what it was that he wanted to accomplish. And then Brian somehow managed to force Drake into a trapped situation where he saw no way out. I'm very glad that eventually Drake got the courage to report what was going on and Brian was arrested. I am pretty upset that he only received a short sentence. 16 months for this horrible, horrible crime. He basically destroyed the childhood of Drake Bell and led him down a destructive path that ultimately led him to become an alleged, I'll say alleged because I don't want to get in any trouble here, alleged perpetrator himself. I'm thinking, and probably many of you are as well, that if none of this had ever happened to Drake, then he would never have gone on to do a lot of the bad things that he allegedly did in the future, you know? So it's a cycle that we often see. Not to say that I believe that if something like this happened to someone in the past, that it gives them the right to do something like that to a person in the future. No, I am not saying that, but it does allow us to understand a little bit how it wound up happening. And I also wanted to say, why in the world would the Disney Channel hire Brian Peck after he got out of prison? And they say they didn't know right away. How could that be? Don't you think it would have been the biggest piece of news in the children's TV network news arena? You know what I'm saying? Like, how could they not have known? And what was it so hard to find a voice actor for their show that they had to hire Brian his shows or movies or whatever it was, and, they liked him, they thought they knew him, but come on. Why are you gonna sit there and say, oh, it's out of character, oh, he shouldn't get too much punishment for it, oh, he must have been very tempted? Who says that? It's a terrible look to go and support a person who committed the crimes that he committed, even if you thought you knew him and you liked him. Well, now you need to rethink that. Absolutely